and work my way to your left. Wendy Tyndall is our Chief Academic Officer. Tanya Reuter is our Chief Communications Officer. Bill Haithcock is our Chief of Schools. And then at the next table, Tarek Hamden is our Chief Financial Officer. So as I said, at the end of the presentation, there'll be an opportunity for questions, and we will work on answering those with this team up here. The goal of tonight is to inform you. We want to provide all the information that we can regarding the financial needs that the district is facing so that you can make an informed decision on February 18th. The question on the ballot reads as basically is going to ask, should Kenosha Unified be authorized to exceed the revenue limit by $23 million beginning with the 25-26 school year and ending with the 29-30 school year for non-recurring purposes consisting of operational expenses and debt service for safety improvements. Just to be clear, that's $23 million a year for 5 years. After that 5 years is up, the referendum goes away. The district's ability to tax at more than the revenue limit goes away as well. So that's 5 years. And I can get into the explanation as far as why 5 years was chosen as the presentation moves along. One thing about state funding of schools is that it is very complicated. So there's a video that was put together by the Wisconsin Public School Relations Association and the Wisconsin Association for School Business Officials that does a great job of explaining how state funding works. It's about a 3-minute video, and I'm going to go ahead and play this for you now. Thank you, Tanya. Better. Say it one more time.
Our public schools are the cornerstone of our community. The education and opportunities we provide for students today shape their futures and ours. Schools, like any organization, need money to operate. But in Wisconsin, funding the needs of our schools has been a growing challenge. State policy limits how much school districts can spend. The vast majority of school funding comes from a combination of state dollars and local property taxes. It's called the revenue limit, and it acts as a cap per student that school districts can spend each year. Even if school costs go above this level, schools can't spend any more than this limit. From 1994 to 2009, these revenue caps were adjusted for inflation, which meant they helped schools keep up with ongoing needs. But since 2010, the resources districts need to survive have fallen farther and farther behind the basic costs to operate our schools. By the end of 2025, the revenue limit will have fallen more than $3,300 per student behind inflation. With a district of 1,000 students, that's a decrease of more than $3 million. What's more, each district has a different revenue cap, and these caps are not tied to the needs of the students or the costs to the schools that serve them. Our job as a school district is to make sure all of our students have access to the exceptional educational opportunities we provide, no matter what their needs when they walk through our doors. But state funding falls short of what it costs to meet the specific needs of many of our students. When that happens, we have to use money from our general fund to cover the difference, which means taking dollars from other important needs. The largest portion of our budget goes towards staffing. Our people are the heart of our schools. Without enough educators who instruct, support, and inspire learning, schools can't provide the lessons, programs, and opportunities our students deserve. Other important budget items include curriculum, technology, transportation, operations, and maintenance. School districts work hard to balance their budgets, yet resources for schools have been shrinking year after year since 2010. With costs growing so much faster than funding, districts are always looking for ways to trim costs and work smarter, like deferring needed school maintenance, cutting programs, reducing staff, and many other strategies. But schools can only cut so much before they start to harm educational opportunities for their students. To maintain class sizes, keep up with rising costs, take care of school buildings, and protect high-quality instruction, many districts have turned to their community to help fill the state-imposed funding gap. Since the arrival of revenue limits, over 80% of school districts have done so by asking local voters to raise their caps through an operating referendum. Most have used the option multiple times. Our children don't have time to wait for state policymakers to fix the school funding system. By putting the needs of our students first, we are investing in their potential and the future of our whole community. Strong schools make strong communities where families want to move and stay. Learn more about school finance in Wisconsin by visiting our websites.
So balancing the 24-25 budget for this school year was far from easy, and it really took an emotional toll on our families, our staff, and our community. While closing schools and reducing staff saved roughly $10 million a year, and it allowed us to have a balanced budget for this school year, 24-25, our foundational issues persist, and we now face a $19 million shortfall for the 25-26 school year and beyond due to a lack of funding support from the state. Had these changes with right-sizing not occurred, the projected shortfall for 25-26 would have been closer to $30 million. In the early 1990s, promises were made that the revenue cap formula would include adequate inflationary increases every year. The state budget is adopted in 2-year cycles, and the promises of the past have not been kept. This has put a financial burden on school districts across the state. In the recent 21-22 and 22-23 school years, districts received a $0 per pupil increase from the state. Instead, districts were encouraged to depend on federal stimulus funds, creating a significant fiscal cliff, one that we now find ourselves on the edge of. So during that time, in 21, 22, and 22, 23, money was given from the federal government, one-time money. We were told to use that one-time money to fund operations. That money has run out, and that's why we're facing the fiscal cliff now. Had state funding kept pace with inflation, KUSD would have an additional $31 million available in its budget, and an operational referendum would not be necessary. State funding has not kept pace with inflation. And during the period when we received temporary stimulus funding, known as ESSER, the state did not provide per-pupil funding increases. And as a result, KUSD's deficit has grown as those expenses continue to rise. The ongoing budget shortfall caused KUSD to make difficult and significant annual budget reductions and cuts. School districts are a people-based industry. School districts across the nation typically spend 80% of their budgets on staff. Because of this, many of the budget cuts on this slide impact our staff. As I shared earlier, last year's school closures and staff reductions resulted in approximately $10 million worth of annual savings. Had this not happened, the projected shortfall for 25-26 would be closer to $30 million. This slide indicates our enrollment decline. So we've talked, and as we're going through right sizing, and districts across the state are facing this. We've talked about our student enrollment decline. So student enrollments are down 11.5%. And we've made staff reductions along the way to align that with our current enrollment. So as you can see, our administrative, supervisory, and technical were reduced by 10%, teachers by 9%. The reason why it's not a one-for-one is that as student enrollment declines, it's not in, they don't decline in 25, sets of 25 per grade level per school. It's spread out across the district. So we've been following as closely as we can, but there's the way that the student enrollments work, it's not neat and tidy. We also take great pride in our financial stability over the years. As responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars, we've consistently made tough decisions to ensure financial sustainability without placing additional burden on our community. In fact, we're among a small number of districts in the state that have avoided seeking an operational referendum. That is until now. Despite our prudent fiscal management, rising costs and limited state funding have brought us to a critical point. As a public school district, we're committed to providing free, high-quality education to all students. However, unlike other sectors, we can't offset rising costs by increasing tuition or fees. Our ability to maintain the level of excellence our community expects is at risk. We have tirelessly advocated for increased state support alongside districts across the state, but progress has been slow. This funding challenge has persisted since the early 1990s with little change. While we remain committed to lobbying for better solutions, we are seeking the community's partnership to ensure we can continue serving our students effectively and responsibly. Kenosha Unified's per pupil funding lags behind that of neighboring districts. You can see on this chart, I don't know if I have a laser here or not. It's not showing up. Kenosha is on the far left. Our per pupil expense, what we're allowed to spend for educating students in Kenosha, is at $11,349. Other districts across the state on the far right, you can see Madison at $14,741. So students in Madison, the way this is computed, if you take the 18,500 students that we have, we get to multiply that by 11,394. Had those students been in Madison, that would have been multiplied by 14,741. Without additional funding, we are in danger of falling further and further behind our neighbors. Madison and Milwaukee on this chart, if you notice, they've also just passed operational referendum questions. Both districts did, so their number on their per pupil spending is going to be higher. These are just our latest figures that don't figure that in. Another point that I'd like to share with you is the third bar from the right is the Wisconsin Parental Choice Program. Private schools serving grades 9 through 12 receive $12,731 per student, which is $1,382 more per student than Kenosha Unified receives. And in addition, we must provide transportation and special education services to all private school families regardless of their voucher participation. And these costs further highlight the strain put on public schools. For these reasons, Kenosha Unified is seeking our community's support on Tuesday, February 18th through a $23 million referendum question. And this issue is not unique to Kenosha. In 2024 alone, 147 operational referendums were proposed by Wisconsin school districts. Just to put that in context, in Wisconsin there are 421 public school districts. There are also two types of referendums. There's a capital referendum, which is to build typically a new building, and an operational one, which is to run the school district. So in 2024, 147 out of those 421 districts had to go to operational referendum, with over a third of them. A survey was conducted to gauge community sentiment regarding KUSD's financial challenges and the possibility of an operational referendum. There were 4,273 respondents, and they indicated that they're aware of our fiscal challenges and believe that we need to address them soon. We had 51.5% say they would support a $19 million scenario that would address the deficit, retain staff, and maintain student programming. Without this referendum, we'll need to make additional cuts to programs and staff. These are difficult decisions that negatively impact our students in the long run. $20 million of this referendum will protect class sizes, vital programs, and staff positions, ensuring the quality of education and student learning remains uncompromised through the 29-30 school year when the referendum expires. We cannot implement and meet our district goals and help our students achieve success if we're cutting staff and programs that support this important work. Our staff need dedicated professional time to deliver the exceptional education our students deserve. By investing in their ability to effectively plan and teach, we ensure our students achieve higher levels of success and readiness for the future. Following the safety incident in November at Roosevelt Elementary, we had many requests for safety enhancements, which is why we included an additional $3 million to be used to upgrade for security. That money would mainly be used to put in controlled entrances at all of our buildings. There are 7 buildings that do not have a controlled entrance at this point. We have a stopgap measure in place, but should this referendum be approved, we would move to put in those controlled entrances as soon as possible. This table includes a mix of several things. The rising costs Kenosha Unified faces because of utilities and other rates. The reabsorption, I did talk about the ESSER funds earlier, that federal money was used to cover such things as facilities, curriculum, and technology funds. It also supports some of our this table also shows some of the initiatives that the district has to meet our district goals and improve student safety and staff safety. The figures for the budget shortfall and safety needs have been rounded to provide a general overview to the community. We don't know exactly what the next budget is. Right now, the legislature and the governor are beginning that process of developing the budget. However, our projections assume that they'll continue providing $325 per pupil, and if that changes, we'll review and adjust our budget projections accordingly. This slide shows the overall impact on our taxpayers, and it varies based on home values, but it gives a general idea of the overall impact. So this really equates to $1.25 for $1,000 in home value. The average home value in the city of Kenosha is $225,000, so this would be an extra $313 per year of property tax. We also have a estimator, property tax estimator, that's located at kusd.edu/referendum. And you can plug in your assessed value, and it will give you your property tax estimate, the increase. So what's the cost of inaction or if our community does not support the referendum? If the referendum doesn't pass, we'll have to make even more very challenging decisions. We stated earlier that staffing is the greatest expense the district has. Cuts to staffing will cause increased class sizes, reduce classes offerings too, as we have to convert and consolidate some of our class offerings, reduce budgets. Some of the other decisions would impact our competitive ability to attract and retain the best teachers. The number one, the best strategy to increase student learning is to have an excellent teacher. Pay freezes to all staff would really hurt our ability to remain competitive if other districts around us are passing their referendum. We would also be foregoing our safety upgrades and the having prep and professional time, the additions that we're looking at. So maintaining the programs currently offered and preserving manageable class sizes are crucial for ensuring the quality of education for our students. These programs provide students with opportunities to explore their interests, develop critical skills, and engage in meaningful learning experiences. Similarly, manageable class sizes allow educators to provide individualized attention, build strong relationships with students, and address diverse learning needs effectively. Together, these elements create an environment where students receive the quality education they deserve and expect. In addition, KUSD has a comprehensive district improvement plan that's guiding our efforts to ensure students continue to have access to an exceptional educational experience. KUSD must have the financial resources and support in place to truly implement this ambitious plan for our students, our families, and communities. Schools are also the basis of a strong community, and investing in their success benefits everyone. Supporting this referendum isn't just about funding education. It's about fostering a community where children, families, and businesses flourish. By ensuring our schools are properly funded, we can move Kenosha Unified forward together. So for the next portion of this, we do want to give you the opportunity to ask questions. And the way that we have this set up is to, by scanning that barcode, you can log your question or write your question in a form. We'll read your questions and answer them on that form. The rationale for doing this and the reason why we're doing this is when you came in, you were given a copy. We also have cards in the back. If your phone's not working, you have a problem with connection, we can also get you a card to turn in. The reason why we're doing this is we want to collect your questions and add them to our frequently asked questions sheet. I believe everybody got one, or you should have got one when you came in. We've been collecting questions as we go around, and we want to give you answers and hand this out and add to our bank of questions for folks. So that's the reason why we're doing it. Tanya Reuter, our Chief Communication Officer, will read those questions as they come in, and I'll be joining people at the table here shortly to begin answering any questions you have. Like I said, I believe Mr. Storino, Dwayne Storino in the back, if you do need a note card and you would like to write it in, we do have that available for you as well.
If the QR code is not working, you can also go to kusd.edu/questions and the form should pull up. Okay, while a few of you finish writing your questions, we're going to go ahead and get started with those that we've received thus far. One of our first questions is, please explain what efforts have been exhausted to support the needed finances. Example, we closed 6 schools. Did we sell them? Are they still being maintained? Have you considered outsourcing things like HR, payroll, maintenance, landscaping, or selling off the senior center, which they note they believe belongs to the county?
Yeah. So the first, I'll take the first part of that question. Can everybody hear me okay? First part of the question regarding the schools that were closed or are not being in use right now. At the January 28th board meeting, there will be a deal brought forward with the city on how to transfer those properties, and our plans for, along with the city, to use that land. We did sell the Dimensions of Learning site. That one was sold. Some of the other properties really were in such condition. So take Washington Middle School, for example. There was $40 million worth of needed repairs in that building. So many of them don't have the value that you would expect due to the condition that they're in.
I would just add to that the marketability of these properties is not as much as you would think because of the zoning. They're not zoned for commercial use. So the part of the city deal is the city has the authority to rezone the properties and make them more marketable. Also, the demolition required and the remediation of the properties required to make them marketable is a very large cost. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. You got to remember, these buildings are so old. They potentially have asbestos abatement required, lead paint disposal, all of the above.
And any profits from the sale of those properties really is one-time money. It's not ongoing operational. So that once those properties are sold and the money's used, it's gone, and it doesn't address our operational needs.
There was another part of that question about outsourcing. Just in generally speaking, the administrative staff that we have at the ESC, when you look at finance department, accounting department, the human resources department, we run lean. We have a very small administrative staff as far as that's concerned, so if outsourcing would probably cost us even more with an employer our size. We're talking about over 3,500 employees. We'd be probably looking at a cost increase to outsource some of those departments.
Have salaries been reduced or furloughs been considered, eliminating a bonus that may have been given?
So the past two cycles of in our negotiations with settling contracts, we've been at half of the consumer price index. So the raises that were given were half of what inflation is. On the previous slide, one of the previous slides, I showed the number of staff members that have been reduced in the district since, I believe that was since the school year 2019 to 2020. The reductions were on that slide. Right around the neighborhood of about 10% of staff was reduced. Just last year, there were over 200 positions that were cut as part of our right sizing.
Can we provide a list of all properties owned by KUSD and demonstrate what has been done to manage that, and if we've considered selling any of those properties?
Facilities planning, yeah. That is an item actually that comes up frequently. We do provide that list publicly to the board, as well as I believe it may be an item for our facilities planning committee. We are constantly reviewing the properties that we own, and we would entertain offers, but again, that's one-time kind of money. This is not something that sustains a operating budget.
We have a question pertaining to the salaries of the individuals on the stage. If we could share where that can be found.
Yep. All of the salaries of administrators and school staff is available on DPI's website. So it's an Excel file last time I looked, or I think it's a lookup now. They changed that. So the salaries of every educator in the state is available at www.dpi.wi.gov.
A question asking why there's not more support from the governor to do more.
So the way that budgets are created, the Joint Finance Committee, which is a bipartisan committee that's chaired by the party that's in power in the state of Madison, creates the budget. That's then submitted to the governor for approval. That process is going on right now. It's beginning, I believe, shortly. The Joint Finance Committee will start meeting. So you'll hear proposals coming out of the governor's office. You'll hear proposals coming out of the state superintendent's office. But really, the Joint Finance Committee is the legislative body that does the state budget, including education.
And the second part of that is what has been done to drive this or to help motivate, like lobbying or?
Oh, sure. So lobbying efforts. A year ago, 2 years ago, myself, the board president at the time, President Adams, and Dr. Price went to Madison to lobby our legislators and share with them our needs as a district and the need to provide more funding. One of the things that I think is really important to note is that if you hear in that video, they talked about the difference between revenue limit and state aid. Revenue limit is spendable money that the district can use. The analogy of that water pitcher, I use a water bottle, that's the revenue limit. The state will say that they've increased funding for education by adding more state aid. State aid isn't spendable money for the district. That just reduces, that's property tax relief, which is great. Nobody wants to pay more property taxes. What we're saying is that we need a bigger bottle. We need our revenue limit increased because that's money that we can actually spend. We do go and we do lobby our legislators. We talk to them about our needs. We just haven't been successful. There's an event coming up where the whole districts around the state go to it to lobby Madison and to advocate for more spending.
What cuts would be prioritized over others should the referendum fail?
I can share a little bit on that. Of course, everything would be presented to the Board of Education, who would make the ultimate decisions, but we would be deferring maintenance, major maintenance, so that would be putting off some much needed repairs that, as you know, with major maintenance type of things, if you don't keep up on, I'll give you an example of a car, if you don't keep up on your oil changes, you can skip a few oil changes, but you will be creating a much bigger problem and a much more expensive problem in your vehicle down the road. So that would be something that we would have to put off again. Restoration of our technology refresh budget, so think of things like Chromebooks for the children and the students. We would have to push that cycle off a little bit more. We would potentially be talking about pay freezes. Other cost-saving measures could include reevaluation health insurance or all kinds of other things that would be more cost shifting back onto the employees, honestly. We would not be able to entertain things that have been deemed priority, like high school, or not just high school, but all teacher prep. That's been an initiative in our district, and that would be something that we just simply could not afford if the referendum fails. And then, of course, the security upgrades that were discussed earlier, too, would have to be rethought.
Okay. This question is, as a supporter of the referendum, I'm concerned about what might happen to the future of this school. Will Ruther and its programs be protected if the referendum fails?
There's been no discussions at this point about changing any of the programming at Ruther.
Can you give an estimate of how many staff you anticipate would be affected should the referendum fail?
I would say all staff would be impacted somehow if the referendum were to fail because of we'd be proposing wage pay freezes and potentially other health care benefits. As far as the actual number of FTE that may be affected, probably 60 or so.
What percentage of the referendum is allocated strictly to school supplies and teacher salary increases?
So this goes back to the table that we displayed. The salary increases, and this is for all staff. The majority of our staff are teachers, but we don't have it broken down with just the teachers. I can give you everybody, all staff, would be about $5.6 million of that 20 would be for the salary increases. And then for health insurance is another 4.1 million. So you see there's almost $10 million of that referendum piece is directly for the benefit of staff. And then not necessarily school supplies, but curriculum. There's about $2 million built in there for curriculum. And $1 million for technology too, that kind of falls into that same category.
Okay, we have a question asking where the funding is coming from to demolish the former, it says Lincoln Middle School, but I believe they meant K-Tech East.
So a little bit of backstory on that one. So I believe we're talking about K-Tech East, Lincoln Elementary School, the old Lincoln Elementary School. We no longer have a K-Tech instrumentality charter school. That was a recent development, but we had the funds that were dedicated for that charter school's reserves to go towards this project are still being entertained to continue on with the project. So to answer the question, where would the money come from? It would be those reserves that were set aside for the former K-Tech instrumentality charter school, which has now been converted to Lakeview K-8 Academy, a choice school within KUSD.
We have a two-part question. Why were windows put into Washington a few years ago as an improvement if we weren't going to use it? As well as who is maintaining all of the closed buildings?
Yep. So during the timing of the Washington Middle School window replacement, that was part of those federal funds through ESSER that was put in place. That occurred prior to the right-sizing project and looking at which schools would be closed and shuttered. When we were going through that process and identifying buildings, one of the factors that we looked at was the needed maintenance. So even though the windows at Washington were replaced, there was still close to $40 million worth of work that need to happen at the Washington Middle School. At that time, the notion to close Washington Middle School hadn't been talked about until the right-sizing project began. So there was probably about a year lag in between that work and then the right sizing work. Right now, the district has we've got the buildings in a state of, I don't know what to call it. We've got the heat down. It's kind of almost like a state of, like a coma. We've got the heat down. We've got very minimal things happening in those buildings. And as we said earlier, by January, at next week's board meeting, we hope to have that deal with the city completed to transfer the ownership over to the city on a lot of those buildings.
Why are we asking for $23 million year over year when the budget lists one-time purchases, such as the security hardware or controlled entrances?
Yeah, the security hardware and controlled entrances portion, those expire in 5 years. So those projects cost about $12.5 million total. So we're going to have to borrow those funds up front so that we can do all the projects at once and get them done. Then this referendum is asking for $3 million a year for 5 years to pay back the debt service. So that's going to be the principal and interest on that $12.5 million loan. And then those other items that are included in there is to create an annual budget, like the security hardware. That's an annual update cycle so that we can make sure that our cameras are on a rotation. We can't upgrade and update each one every year, but we'll have a rotating schedule to make sure that our technology is current.
Would a referendum last year have prevented the school closures?
You want to take that?
Those I really want to look at as two separate issues. As a district, we really, in my opinion, we need to make sure that we are using our buildings and our resources as efficiently as possible. So by consolidating schools, by closing schools, we are being fiscally responsible with our money. I would have a very hard time standing here before you asking for a $30 million referendum when some of our schools are 50 to 60% occupied. So I do believe that that had to happen, that right sizing was a necessary step because it is not just showing, but it is being fiscally responsible with taxpayer money. So I think regardless, that had to occur. And it also our ask would have been $10 million more a year, which I don't think would be the right thing to ask our community.
Would this referendum increase our taxes again in addition to the recent property tax increases?
The simple answer is yes. The referendum would increase your taxes. That's the short story. So how much is where you can plug in on our calculator that we have on the website. But one nuance to that is the first year of the referendum, you're going to feel the full impact. So you'll feel the full $23 million tax increase. So that's where we're showing that a average home of $250,000 value would see an increase that year of approximately $313 per year. The second year of the referendum, because of the way that we're aided by the state, that additional spending would be eligible for additional equalization aid. We are what's called a positively aided school district, so that additional spending would get back approximately 16% for us is what the estimation is for that year. So that would be property tax relief, so that we could compare then in the year 2026-27, which would be the second year of the referendum, the increase would go down to about $242 per year. So yes, still an increase, but it would be reduced.
How does our budget compare to regional schools like Mukwonago and Arrowhead that are ranked higher but have larger class sizes and low medium household income?
Yeah, budget size goes by enrollment size and then your per pupil amount. So that's kind of the discrepancies within the state of Wisconsin. When they set those revenue limit numbers in the early 1990s, what they did was take a snapshot of each school district spending for the past couple years, and they said, this is your district's baseline spending. So conservative spending school districts actually got punished for that. So your baseline number started off lower. Even before we talked about inflationary increases, your baseline number was lower if you were a conservative spending school district in like the 3 years prior to setting that revenue limit law. Subsequent to that, every district that passes an operational referendum gets to build that into their base. So that slide that we showed you up earlier, showing the maximum revenue allowed per member, that grows with successfully passed operational referenda. So just because they have a smaller school district, they could be receiving more per member, and they give them more resources and opportunities.
And just to elaborate on that a little bit, a district like Arrowhead probably has a student enrollment of 2,000. Kenosha Unified has an enrollment of 18,500. So in comparing the budgets of those two districts, it's important to look at the per pupil spending between those two districts. That really tells the story. There are districts in the North Shore of Milwaukee, I want to say Nicolet, who are some of the highest in the state, and I want to say it's about $18,000 per student compared to $11,300, $400 for Kenosha Unified. But again, you need to look at the per pupil spending to really tell the full story of that.
What program improvements are being planned and to which programs and services?
Could you repeat that again?
What program improvements are being planned and to which programs and services?
Ms. Tyndall, would you like to address that from a curriculum and instruction lens?
So currently, Act 20 has given us the opportunity to redesign reading instruction for K through 3 students. We have gone through a very intense professional learning schedule with all of our K-5, pre-K-5 teachers, all of our school administrators in the elementary level, aligning that professional learning to the requirements of Act 20, which will have a great impact on instructional practices in the classroom. So we are in the second year of planning and first year of implementation of that, all of that work. That is curriculum work, assessment, teacher data rounds to make decisions for what is happening in the classroom for learners that are not meeting the 25th percentile. So that is one opportunity that we are full force in right now, knowing that we are improving instructional practices for our PK through 3 and 4 and 5 students.
Okay. We have a question. Health insurance increase showed 4.1 million. Employers passed this on to employees in the form of higher premiums and deductibles. Was this done in KUSD, or is the district absorbing the cost?
So it has been done previously. Our district moved to a high deductible plan, and there's been changes to the prescription drug plan. There's been changes to the network. So all those things have happened in KUSD over the years. And the HSA, we used to have a portion of the HSA funded by the district. That's all gone away.
We kind of touched on this one a little, but why is KUSD's per pupil funding so low?
So back in 1993, revenue limits were introduced by the state, and as Mr. Hamden said, whatever your spending was in 1993 per pupil was your baseline moving forward. So as if KUSD started, I'm just throwing out a number, if we started at 8,000, Madison started at 10,000, over time the percentage increases create that disparity that you saw on our graph. Additionally, operational referendum questions that were passed by other districts are figured into that number as well. So I mentioned earlier that Milwaukee and Madison both passed some significant operational referenda, that will be reflected in their numbers in next year's data.
Next question is, what plans are being made to address and increase the percentage of students scoring proficient or advanced in reading and math?
I don't know, Wendy or Bill, you want to take that one?
So we know our data shows that this is a focus, a needed focus for us. We currently have a pretty aggressive goal. You saw that 12% increase. That is as aggressive as we've ever been. What are we doing to achieve that? We have a district improvement plan process with our goals and strategies and action steps to address that. And each school has their school improvement plan to do the same, mirroring what the district is doing. So some of our district strategies include content rounds, include instructional shifts. Like I said, the Act 20 is defining what instructional shifts are happening at the PK through 5 level. At the middle school and high school levels, we are focusing on student engagement through high-quality instructional practices. Those are some of our universal strategies. That is all on our website. If you go on there, you will see each one of our district improvement strategies with action steps there, and then a progress piece that we update beginning, middle, and end of year.
I just want to comment, Wendy, Mrs. Tyndall talked about Act 20. We meet monthly, a couple of times a month in different ways with schools working on the school improvement process to increase our student achievements. I'll just a little more in depth on Act 20. It requires us to go into and create specific plans. So like, I know we have one elementary school right now that we have 100 kids that need to have individualized plans, and there's rules in terms of how we follow up with families and give them progress, how they're doing towards those plans. The one school that I'm thinking of right now has a half-time interventionist scheduled to work with those 100 plans. And so it's just a challenge that I think that Act 20 is one of the best things that's come forward in our state in a long time. It's just, it is very specific in terms of what needs to be done, including individualized plans for 25 kids below that 25th percentile, and it's an amazing challenge that I hope we're able to do with great effort and authentic approach, because I think it will really make a difference. It's just, it takes staff and time to accomplish all of those things in a great way, and you lower the resources and it just makes that tougher.
So the impact of the classroom teacher on that process is great also, and you saw the planning and preparation line item in there. That item is there because our teachers will be more effective in really making data decisions based off of the progress monitoring that is going on weekly for each of those students with that reading plan. So that reading plan drives instruction, and the progress monitoring really has to be analyzed week by week to ensure that we have the best plan for student in need. So where you might see that line item, teachers need more planning time, and you might question for what. It is for designing lessons that specifically target the focus, the skill deficiency that these students may have. And that's reading per Act 20, but that's also math. So small group instruction is really where it's at, and teachers are able to deliver small group instruction focused on a skill gap only when they are able to have the time to dig through the progress that students are or are not making. And so therefore that increase in planning time is really crucial to moving students forward.
For this next question, we might want the clicker just to go back to the slide, but Please provide further explanation or transparency for the projected expense line items. Define some of the terms or acronyms that may have been used.
Go back. There we go. Okay, I'm going to take a stab at this one. So, if we're looking at the expense items, so the first line up there, reference number 1, and I apologize for the small print up there, but you see a $1.8 million structural deficit carried. That number has a range in it. When we adopted the 24-25 budget, we had about an $800,000 structural deficit. That's what we call structural deficit, meaning the projected revenues fell short $800,000 versus the projected expenses for that year. What we've done is consider a scenario, though. We had an exceptional anomaly with the K-Tech enrollment this year, and this is prior to the change of the nature of K-Tech to Lakeview K-8 Academy. But when it was an instrumentality charter school, we were anticipating that the enrollment would come back in 25-26, so we were setting aside some additional funding to absorb that instance if it occurred. And we also had something called a tax-exempt property aid that was an anomaly this year that was provided to us as tax relief, but could potentially come back to our funding formula that would cause another $1 million swing. So that's the detail on that number. A restoration of ESSER, that's the COVID grant relief funds. That's the tech refresh budget, like we said, those Chromebooks, Promethean boards, those kinds of things. Restoring major maintenance, that's major maintenance of the buildings. So think of things like roof repairs, parking lots, all the above. Restoring ESSER, again, COVID relief funds that we used because they were eligible costs to be able to shift some normal operational things into the COVID funds, such as summer school. On that note, we have received some questions about like, well, why didn't you use your COVID funds to do the security upgrades? Those were not eligible expenses under that grant. So we had to get creative and find things that we could put into there that qualified as a temporary measure when we were getting $0 increases at the state level. Health insurance, that's the premium cost increase. Our salary schedule increases, so that's just the cost of moving people onto their next level. The CPI increase is the consumer price index or cost of living adjustment. Curriculum adoption, that's pretty clear what that is. That's the materials, not just textbooks. That's the licensing, the software. That's what our students are using every day. Transportation cost increase, we contract with First Student to service our transportation, and those contracts have consumer price index or inflationary increases built into them. If we can't keep up on the revenue side to make up for the expense side inflationary increases, that's what creates these budget deficits. Another thing about something like transportation, it becomes kind of the perfect storm for us. When we lose student enrollment, we lose the revenue associated with those students. So we're losing, almost $12,000 per student on average. But we can't necessarily reduce our cost for transportation. The number of students on the bus might go down, but we're still running that bus route. And that bus route costs more than it did the prior year. So that's what creates the problem for us. Same thing goes with staffing. As Dr. Weiss alluded to earlier, we don't have students that leave in nice, neat packs of 22, 23, 24 students per classroom at an individual school. They're spread out throughout the district. So there's a little bit of a numbers game going on there where we may lose students in revenue but we can't make the corresponding offsetting overhead cost decrease. Property insurance increases, liability insurance increases. We contract with the county for our nursing services. All of those have inflationary increases built into them. High school prep time, elementary prep time, lines 13 and 14, that's what we talked about, freeing up teachers, prep, professional time, so that's taking, adding time to their day that's not direct instruction with students, so that they can analyze data, they can be better at looking at individual student needs. Line 15 is the debt service. That's the $3 million that was added that would be required to pay back the $12.5 million loan over 5 years. Security hardware, think of things like the cameras. That would be creating that cycle so that we can make sure that everything's current and the quality of the images are sufficient. Upgraded security DVR, that's kind of the back room stuff. Think of the DVRs that are storing the data. There's potential to have some software enhancements there where we can search images, we can do things more efficiently. And then on the top part, I just skipped over that briefly, but that's our projected revenues. As we talked about, the $325 per member increase that the governor vetoed and created that line item, which is now being disputed in the courts. But for right now, we're assuming that that $325 per member stays built into the formula. So we would actually receive about $3.7, $3.8 million more in revenue limit authority as it stands. But that money gets eaten up really fast as you see these other expense items. Doesn't even cover the health insurance increase. So when we look at revenues increasing by $3.5 million, but expenses also increasing by nearly $26 million, that's where you see the structural budget deficit.
Okay, thank you. Can you share what is the cost of a family health care package and what do teachers and administrators pay?
I can. It said family, right?
Yep, it was specific
Yeah,
about
we
family.
actually have 4 different levels for our health insurance plans. So we have employee, employee plus children, employee plus spouse, and then family, which is the most expensive package. Our family plans total premium is about $35,822. Most of our employees pay 10% of that cost. So they're going to pay $3,582 for that plan. We have a small number of staff that are basically our food service and our educational support professionals that pay 6% of the premium, so it's a little less. They would be paying $2,149.
Okay. Can you share how many teachers were let go when schools were closed, or all-in staff, because it also says staff, maintenance, admin? Were any jobs created then, and how many individuals were fired?
So the number of, we have a short-term, I'm just trying to formulate my thoughts on this. We have short-term contracts, like one-year assignment letters. Folks that were on those one-year assignment letters were the folks who were, the teachers who were not brought back. I don't know exactly how many that is, but those were if teachers just had a one-year contract, those were the ones that were ended. For our staff that were on a continual contract, our teaching staff, all of those teachers we were able to find a new assignment for them. So we had no teacher layoffs, which is something I was very happy about. That was our HR department. Did a lot of work to ensure that happening. And as I mentioned earlier, there were about 200 FTE that were reduced. Some of those out of the administrative, supervisory, and technical category. I think there were 3 that were laid off in that group. I'm trying to remember exactly, but I think that's about right. So the good news on that is that we were able to find most people homes. The bad news is that people did lose jobs, so people who were on a one-year contract and several of the people who were on the administrative, supervisory, and technical contracts.
And just to make sure we answer it all, so were any jobs created and was anybody fired with that?
Non-renewal is, I don't know if that's, wouldn't consider a contract was non-renewed, so it wasn't necessarily a firing as a result of the right sizing. There were other terminations that occurred outside of right sizing last year. So not because of that, contracts were non-renewed. And what was the other part? I'm sorry, Tanya.
Were any new roles
Any
created?
new roles created? I don't believe there were. Not as a result of the right sizing.
And not through that budget.
And not through the
Maybe
budget assumption.
Title
So,
funding, like culture coaches.
oh yeah.
So we
Yeah.
did add some positions. A culture coach was created, but that was not funded out of this budget. That is title positions that were funded out of title money. We also added some interventionists, but again, not out of this budget. So we were not able to, like when Bill was referencing, one school has a 0.5 interventionist to service 53 students. That's very targeted instruction. With a half-time person, that's nearly impossible. People are working really, really, really hard to service our most needy students.
Yep, and just to build off of that, so the title funding is a federally funded program. It's a grant program from the federal government that's separate from this, and there are requirements around which positions that money can be used for. It's very targeted, very specific as far as at what schools as well, so that's where the added positions came out of that fund.
I'll just add too that a lot, like the culture coaches, we actually had a different position. Many of those people were in a different title that we moved over to that role. They weren't necessarily new.
This one says, as a supporter of the referendum, I would like to know, how do you plan to gain public trust in ensuring funds will be used for teachers and addressing the achievement gap?
So our budget is very public. It's very open. We share it. There's a existing line item at every board meeting regarding the budget. And we want to keep that as part of the transparency that we have. And we will be using, part of gaining trust is coming out and talking to folks. And we've got this town hall meeting. We've got 2 more coming up. I've been going around probably to about, made 12 visits to other organizations to share our story and our needs and how we, to provide people as much information as possible.
With the demands of Act 20, will there be staff increases to meet the demands if the referendum passes?
As far as staff increases, I don't believe we've talked about any. This would go into that professional time to make sure that we are giving our staff the adequate time to review student data and to make appropriate plans moving forward. So that's the support that the district is hoping to get.
Okay. We compared KUSD to other districts. Are we able to provide comparisons to those districts, like class size, student-teacher ratio, student-to-administrator ratio, and achievement scores in reading and math?
Yeah, there's publicly available data on DPI's website, specifically with the reading scores and report card data. You can compare us to anybody, actually. The class sizes is a little bit more difficult. You have to maybe get some information directly from the districts. But there is some staff to student ratio information out there as well.
Where does funding of sports fall in the prioritization of cuts?
The funding of sports and some extracurriculars isn't, actually that's a relatively small monetary expense from the district. I don't have the number right offhand. As we go down this budget path, I would say all options are on the board, or on the table for the reductions we have to make. Sports really isn't, and extracurriculars really isn't the funding really isn't that significant, where I would say that if we cut X sport, if we cut football or soccer, that would take care of all of our needs. So that's really, I think that's my best answer to that question right now. It's not off the table, but it's really not a major cost savings.
Who chose the 12% for our improvement? Why not 50%?
As we were working with that was really decided upon in conjunction with the state. And do you want to elaborate on that, Wendy?
So the state sets measures for us, and to be aggressive enough within the next 3-year cycle. We just started a 3-year school improvement plan, district improvement plan cycle. That 12% would get us to that state goal, and that is a 3-year goal. So within 3 years, we're hoping to grow 12%. Oh, why not 50%? Well, we would love for that to happen, but we also are realistic. 12% is our most aggressive goal that we have ever chosen for the school district, and we have never met that. We have never grown that much in 3-year cycle. So we feel it was very aggressive and more attainable and more realistic of what we could attain.
Why are we having a referendum before the state budget is finalized?
2 parts on that. State budget process can take a long time, and what we've seen historically from the state budget is proposals look great, but they're just proposals, and they often, even the governor's initiatives, don't make it through the Joint Finance Committee version of the budget that's presented. So we've seen the history, and we welcome anything that comes through from the state budget, but we're not holding our breath, and we really can't afford to wait any longer. We're falling behind other districts that are going to referenda as well.
Yeah, I would add as well that school districts can only go to ask a referendum question during a scheduled election cycle. So our choices are, for this year, February, April, and I don't even think there's one in November. I think it's just February and April. The state budget many times isn't completed until summer. One year, I remember, it wasn't completed until September or October. So by choosing February, and let me explain why we chose February, our staffing cycle, when we start asking students to begin filling out their course selections, when we begin to build that whole staffing process, that begins in January and February. So by having a referendum in February, we're able to determine what our staffing levels are going to be, so when we go out and we need to recruit teachers or we need to have those staffing discussions, we're doing it early enough in the cycle that it meets, that we're able to make sure that if we waited until April and realized we had to hire a significant number of teachers, it's much more difficult to do that in April and May as opposed to February. So it really is to fit our cycle.
This person is sharing that they see the possible cuts, but couldn't other programs like sports, arts, etc. also be cut if it doesn't pass? Looking for clarity on all possible cuts for transparency and what happens if the referendum does not pass.
Those items can definitely be cut. As I said earlier, to get to 19 or $20 million, it's going to take more than individual sports. Just as a frame of reference, when we closed 7 schools and consolidated, so that was a total of 7 schools, I believe, that resulted in just over $9 million of savings. An additional $1 million was taken out of staff at ESC. And that still didn't get us across the line. So when we start talking about the numbers and the budget line associated with those items, just isn't large enough to reach that, to close the gap that we're talking about. It can be part of the answer, and it's an answer I hope we don't have to make, because those really are beneficial to a lot of our students and help keep them engaged in school.
This question was asked by a few people, so I'll just consolidate them. But if the referendum is not passed, what do you anticipate classrooms will look like in regards to class sizes, and what do our current class sizes look like now?
Bill, have you done work on that yet?
Yeah, elementary class sizes right now, we have a class size policy that's 22 for K1, 24 for 2-3 and 26 for the older kids in elementary school, and then our middle schools and high schools can go up to 30. You know, it really depends on course requests, and so you hear us talk about averages. You know, the class sizes. Sometimes, you know, kids. Jeff said kids don't come in neatly sized, or actually Tarek said kids don't come in neatly sized packages of 24, and so we get into trouble with difficult class sizes. Just part of the business that we're in. But yeah, you could see that increase. You could see high schools pushing 30 as an average is what we're looking at if it didn't happen. You know, you start thinking about that as an average. You got some smaller. You know, it's just those are will be very difficult decisions that we'll have to try to deal with. Yeah. We will also have to make difficult decisions in terms of what classes we might have to get rid of. Some classes we have are, we're trying to run it with 18, 19 kids. We got kids that want to get this AP class or this other elective class that they want to take, and so we're trying to run it. That really hampers our ability to run those classes that are around the 18 to 20 range. We'd have to make tough decisions.
For this one, we might be able to find the slide again as well, but we showed our per pupil revenue for Kenosha was around $11,000. And we also compared to other districts. How are they managing, and what are their plans, or what are they proposing on tax increases?
Yeah. It really is district specific for some of those. I know that I can just talk about districts that I know are going to referendum. Madison and Milwaukee already went. I know that Racine has just is going in April for a referendum. I don't know, do you know of any others offhand? I know there's a bunch west of the interstate in Kenosha County. I heard Salem and Bristol just, I think. So a lot of districts are looking at going to operational referendum. One of the stories I just saw today was that Mauston is considering dissolving. They'll be financially insolvent if they don't pass one. This is their 3rd attempt at one. And the danger in Mauston is that their district may dissolve. So
on this question, they're referring back to the average home value of $250,000. However, some properties can be up to $1 million in our community. Are there plans to limit impact to any one household?
It just simply doesn't work that way. We can't limit anything for an individual household. In fact, we don't assess a property tax to an individual household. As a school district, the board sets a levy, and that gets proportioned out to the municipalities that are within our boundaries based on the size of the property values within their individual municipality. So City of Kenosha will get a portion of our bill. The Village of Pleasant Prairie and the Village and Town of Summers, they will get a proportionate piece of the tax levy. Then each municipality assesses your properties, and then they determine what portion that individual household will pay of that bill.
Thank you. What other measures has the district made to balance the budget, going back further, like back 2011?
Just off the top of my head, I mean, there's some programs that don't exist today that existed back then. Infant Lab comes to mind, being part of Ruther at one point. Yeah, the schedule at the high school now being 6 of 7, 6 instructional periods being taught out of 7. That's a big change from the district. So, I mean, going back to 2011, many things, insurance carrier switch, plan design switch to a high deductible plan.
How much is the dissolving of K-Tech saving?
That's going to be more of a long-term thing, but depends on how the staffing will shake out. It could be potentially up to $1 million.
Just to be clear, we're changing it. K-Tech isn't going away. We're going to stay in that building. We're going to run Lakeview K-8. So that school will be there. It just won't be an instrumentality charter anymore. It'll be a district choice school. But there's no plan for that school to go away.
A few questions to combine a few here to make sure we get through everybody's questions. This one is asking, is there a long-term solution for school funding? And again, a few people asking about what can we do to lobby?
Right. There is a long-term solution. People, you may be tired of hearing me say this, but at least around this table, in 2018, there was a blue ribbon panel commission put in place that was bipartisan. It was chaired by Luther Olson of the Wisconsin Dells and Joel Kitchens of, I believe, Sturgeon Bay. They put together recommendations in this document that really spell out how to fix school funding in the state of Wisconsin. That document is still valid today as it was then, so there is a plan to fix it. There is a state surplus right now that could fund it, and I would say that I really wish it would happen, because school districts shouldn't be put into the position that they're put into. I would really rather not be coming out and asking folks to raise their property taxes. There is a fix. The Blue Ribbon Panel Commission has that document. It was put together. It's still active. It's still very, very, very appropriate.
Have we tried to cut admin and staff salaries to help the budget?
Yeah, we're talking about pay freezes. There hasn't been a cut, but giving, one of the dangers, and I just want to be clear on this, is that we are in a very competitive market for staff. There is a teacher shortage nationwide. We're competing for a very small group of employees, and the more that we reduce our salaries and the more we reduce our benefits and the less inviting our work environment is, it makes us much less competitive for getting the best staff, getting the best people to come and work for us. Having high school teachers teach 6 to 7 courses, I've been in 5 districts, and none of the districts that I've been in have our high school teachers taught 6 out of 7 courses. Actually, one district I was in, I had a conversation about this district on my way in with somebody, a 9-period day, and I believe it was 5 out of 9 that teachers taught in that district. So have all of those things put us at a competitive disadvantage. Cutting salaries would put us at a further competitive disadvantage in attracting and retaining the best staff.
Can you share what ways title funds are being reviewed or adjusted to address the deficit as it relates to technology, support staff, or Act 20 support?
Yeah. We're very limited. The title funds, the Title I budget cannot be used to do that. That's supplanting. Be called supplanting if we're using title funds to pay for things that the district ought to be spending the money on. It's designed to be additional and extra help, targeting students and families who are low income or in poverty. And we can't use those funds to offset other expenses. That's illegal and we lose the funding. We are audited by the state on that.
Why are the closed neighborhood schools not being saved in case student numbers increase?
2 parts to that. So the projections that we have for student enrollment don't look good for the next 5 years at least and beyond. But 5-year projections that correlate with birth rates is really where we feel strongest. We don't see a big change in enrollment coming anytime soon. Number 2, vacant buildings are problematic. Nobody wants to see vacant buildings in the neighborhoods. They're very expensive to insure. They invite vandalism. They invite problems. So that's why we don't want vacant buildings being kept up. And they'd be expensive to maintain.
This one relates to charter schools. What other reserves are being held by KUSD, and why are those not being allocated to the deficit?
So we also do have just general fund reserves, but those are what we call operational reserves. That's the money that we need to run our district. The way that we're funded by the state through the aid and through property tax collections is structured such that there are periods of time within our year that we receive no funding. So we think of a cash flow situation. We have some months where we have no money coming in, but we have great expenses going out. So we need to have adequate reserves on hand so that we don't need to what's called short-term cash borrow. Our district has had to do that. Only since these last 2 years have we built up enough adequate reserves where we've been able to avoid that short-term cash borrowing. And it's really important because we are in the highest interest rate environment that we've seen in my lifetime. In a high interest rate environment, you absolutely want to avoid borrowing. So there would be a double whammy to doing this. If you spend down your reserves, you not only will worsen your financial position, but you will also miss out on the gains that you have on investments. So when you have money that you have sitting in reserve waiting for your cash flow needs, you're earning interest on that. So if we were to spend down our reserves, not only would we have to make those up, we would also have to make up for the lost revenue that we have built into our budget, which is also more than $1 million.
If the referendum fails, is there a backup plan for unsecured entrances?
That would be something that the board would contemplate, but they would still have the option to move forward with the borrowing, but it would come at the cost of something else. So the board would have to make that decision.
We have a few questions about the salary increases and whether or not we have considered a pay-for-performance model.
The pay-for-performance model really was talked about more in the, I want to say, in the 90s and the early 2000s. The research behind that shows that it really didn't work. The damage that was done to culture, the damage that was done to collaborative environments within the school and the staff was much more harmful. Also, it was very difficult to pinpoint one teacher's influence on a particular, what's the word? It's like when you have a study, one factor, so one factor in pinpointing a teacher's influence on that one factor, that one aspect. So pay for performance really has not, didn't gain traction. I haven't heard talk of it in quite a number of years. Also, I don't think that pay for performance would fix the budget problem if we're still increasing salaries. So.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah.
Will the referendum allow for more staff and resources to be sent to schools, especially those struggling academically?
What's in our proposal is to maintain what we currently have. There aren't additional resources that are part of this referendum. This is, the prep and professional time would be an increase of resources in the resource of time. However, that's the only one. Mainly this is to continue our current level of services. And that was we made that decision based on the survey that we put out back in September, and the results of that survey from the community indicated that that's what the community would support.
We have a few questions asking if tuition is required or if we could raise tuition, especially for schools like Lakeview Academy.
We are a public school district. We are not allowed to charge tuition. Tuition-free public education. Any fees have to be for consumable items. So that's not tuition. That's for something that students will use, and it will basically go away with them. What is prep time comprised of, and why does it cost? Why is the cost estimated at $4 million?
So prep time and professional time are used for planning and for assessing lessons. There's a variety, and I think we actually had a presentation on this at a recent committee meeting, that we can try to find that slide for who was ever asking that question. But really it's time for doing the work that has to occur behind the scenes to make sure that teachers are ready for teaching students. The reason why it costs more is it gets into a number game. So if there is a need to have 30 sections of English and everybody teaches 5 sections of those 30, you need 6 teachers. If you have 6 teachers teaching if you have everybody teaching 6, I'm sorry, I'm saying this wrong. 30 sections, if you have everybody teaching 6, you need 5 teachers. If you have everybody teaching 5, you need 6 teachers. So that additional staff person is the cost of the prep time.
Thank you. Not sure if we'd have this handy, but what is the distribution of funds for salary raises through the district? So percentage for teachers versus other employee groups.
It's all to be determined, but up on the slide that we had, the graph, all groups would be receiving 2% salary increases in this model. 1.5% is the equivalent for moving people on the salary schedule. There are some people that are maxed out on their salary schedule, so they would not get that 1.5%. But the line number 7, salary CPI increases, all groups would receive the 2%.
A question about the work for the controlled entrances, feeling like 400,000 plus seems like a lot. Has this gone out for bid?
Yep. Everything did go out to bid, and when we talked about controlled entrances, it's more than just putting in another set of doors. The way that buildings were built, schools were built, and I'm going to use Columbine really as the marker. Before Columbine, there really wasn't a need in our schools to think about controlled entrances, which is, and I'm sorry, this is really a sad commentary on where things are at, but it's the harsh realities we have to deal with. In a lot of our schools that are older, the main office is in the middle of the building, designed to kind of be the hub, so everybody has access to the principal and to the office. A controlled entrance is moving that office up to the front so that as visitors come in, they can be screened before they can enter the building. So this is, the $12.5 million is for 7 schools. That was an estimate. It's gone out to bid in a competitive bidding process. And it really does involve some major construction and remodeling of schools to have those controlled entrances in place. But like I said, the way schools were built, the way this school was built, it was designed to get people out in case of a fire, not to keep people out in the community from coming inside. A lot of doors around here was designed, if there's a fire, you get out as quickly as you can. The thought of having to keep the public out or to keep other people out, it just wasn't a thought pre-Columbine.
We have a concern about what this may mean for current teacher recruitment efforts. If the referendum fails, what does this mean for teacher recruitment and retention? Yeah. And what would happen to the prep time proposal?
Yep. I would not be recommending the prep time proposal if this referendum doesn't fail, if this referendum doesn't pass, and it would significantly, as I mentioned, in showing some of the other districts, if we have a district to our north that's going for referendum be successful and is able to give a pay increase and move up their salary schedule and have fewer classes that teachers have to teach, that would be a much more attractive district to work in for our staff than our own. So I am concerned if this fails and others around us pass, that we'd be put at a competitive disadvantage for attracting the best staff and retaining the best staff.
Thank you. We have a few questions about why 5 years, why not 1?
Yep. So the why 5 years, as we mentioned earlier, was we know our birth rate. We know our birth rate for this year, and we can compute that out to figure out how many kindergartners we're going to have, how many 5-year-olds are going to enter our building. So we have a pretty good feel for about a 5-year period of what our needs are from a student enrollment standpoint. Why not 1 year? Because we need to plan on a further out than 1 year. Some of the discussions that we had when we were coming up with this, we discussed a recurring referendum, which means it continues on forever. The concern about that was we don't know what's going to happen at the state level. So a 5-year window gives us two state biennium budgets to look at. It allows us to plan out and to make some pretty solid planning for our staffing, for our needs, without locking us into a certain number forever. So 5 was that went through our committee structure, that went through discussion at the board. And it really does allow us to plan, but also to adjust should things change.
Does the district have a view on the proposal to send federal education funding back to the states?
I believe I'm not quite sure what's being referenced there, because the title money is sent to the states to be distributed. I'm not sure. I guess I need more clarification on that one.
And then this will be the last one, and then again, we'll take the ones that are not already existing on the FAQ and make sure they get added to there as well for future reference. But to what do you attribute declining enrollment rates, and what are we doing to attract more
Yep.
students?
Sure. So I saw a declining enrollment rates, couple factors. The biggest one is birth rate. There is more competition too for public schools. One of the studies I just saw, or a news story, it wasn't a study, it was a news story, projected that the population of Wisconsin is going to decrease by 200,000 people by 2050. And that's due to lower birth rate and people moving out of the state for whatever reasons. One of our strategies is to provide as much choice, to provide high-quality education. We have some very, very strong programs. So the Lakeview High School just moved into a new building we're leasing that from CABA. We were leasing the old building. CABA built this new building, state-of-the-art facility. Very happy with the programming that is offered there at Lakeview. It was a great deal we had with CABA to get that new building to offer and to attract more people to our district. We have a wide variety of choices for our families to come to Kenosha. Great high-quality education as well. So those are some of the things that we're doing. But again, the number of people in the state of Wisconsin is going down, so it's difficult. So that's our last question. Again, thank you everyone for coming out this evening. As Ms. Reuter said, if you have more questions that you'd like to see answered, please submit them, and we will put all of the questions and answers up on our FAQ site webpage, is on our district website. So again, thank you very much and have a good evening.